I remember the morning I realized we had drifted apart. James sat at the kitchen table scrolling through his phone while I stood by the window watching the sunlight creep across the floor. Neither of us said good morning. There was no argument, no dramatic moment, just a heavy silence that had somehow become normal. We had been together for nearly 5 years. In the beginning, everything felt magical. We laughed at the smallest things and talked for hours about nothing and everything. Now we barely exchanged more than a few words each day. We still lived in the same apartment, slept in the same bed, but it didn't feel like love anymore. I made toast and sat across from him. He asked if I wanted butter, and I nodded. He passed it without meeting my eyes. I spread it slowly, waiting for something more, but that was all. At work that day, I couldn't stop thinking about us. A colleague asked if I was feeling okay, and I smiled and said I was just tired. But the truth was I felt invisible in my own home, and I had no idea how to fix it. That evening, we sat on the couch watching television. He laughed at something on the screen and turned to me. "You're quiet tonight," he said. I just nodded. Then he reached for my hand and held it gently. I didn't pull away, but I didn't feel anything either. His touch had become a habit, kind but empty. I missed when his touch made me feel loved, when his words made me feel important. Now everything felt distant. At night, he fell asleep quickly while I stared at the ceiling. My mind circled the same questions. How did we get here? When did it change? Was it my fault or his? I remembered when he used to bring me flowers for no reason and leave little notes in the kitchen saying things like, "Good luck today," or "I miss your laugh." I hadn't seen a note in months. Now we only talked about groceries and bills. I didn't know how to tell him I was hurting because I didn't want to hurt him. But pretending everything was fine only made me feel more alone. On Saturday, we walked through the park, something we used to enjoy. He talked about his work and I nodded in the right places, but I felt like a stranger listening to someone else's life. He bought us ice cream and we sat on a bench watching children play. I looked at the sky and felt nothing. Back home, he cooked pasta, our usual comfort meal. We ate in silence with the television filling the empty spaces between us. That night, I sat with my notebook and wrote, "He held my hand, but I didn't feel it." I stared at that sentence for a long time. It was simple, but it said everything I couldn't speak out loud. The next evening, I decided to try. I waited until we were both sitting down and said quietly, "I need to talk to you." He looked up from his phone. "I feel distant from you," I said, "like we're here, but not really together." He frowned and said he thought we were okay. "I'm not okay," I told him. "We don't really talk anymore. I miss us." He sat back and said work had been demanding lately. "I know," I said, "but it's more than that. I feel alone." He reached for my hand again. I let him, but my heart felt far away. We sat like that, both trying to understand, both hoping it wasn't too late. The days after our conversation were different. James tried harder. He sent messages during the day asking how I was, and one evening he came home early with takeout from my favorite restaurant. We ate on the balcony and watched the sunset. It was nice, but it still didn't feel deep enough. That week, I found my old painting supplies in the closet. I hadn't painted in over a year. When James saw the paint on my hands, he smiled and said it was good I was painting again, but he didn't ask more. I painted in the evenings while he watched sports. We were together, but not really. One night I painted two shapes, one blue and one grey, standing close but not touching. That's how we felt to me. At dinner one night he asked, "Are we okay?" I looked at him and said, "I don't know. I'm trying." He nodded. Me too. We ate the rest of our meal in silence. Later, I met my friend Lena for coffee. She asked how things were at home, and I said, better but not enough. She looked at me kindly and asked if I still loved him. I paused. "I think so," I said, "but I'm tired." James suggested we take a trip. We booked a weekend by a lake. The place was quiet and beautiful. We walked together and talked more than we had in months. It felt better for a while, but even there I felt the space between us. One afternoon I sat alone by the water while he read at the cabin. That night, by the fire, he looked at me and asked, "Do you want to stay together?" I froze. "I want to feel close again," I said. "I want to stop pretending everything's fine." We talked for hours that night about our fears, our mistakes, our distance. It was the most honest we had been in years, and still I felt unsure. When we returned home, James continued trying. He cooked more often and stayed off his phone. But I realized kind gestures weren't enough on their own. They didn't fix the sadness living quietly inside me. One night he hugged me from behind in the kitchen and whispered, "I'm really trying." I believed him, but it didn't change how empty I felt. Then he suggested counseling, and I agreed. The sessions were hard, but helpful. We learned to listen again and say what we needed. James cleaned my old brushes and set up a painting space for me. That small act touched me deeply because it showed he still saw who I was. We started walking after dinner with no phones and no plans. He told me about his day, and I shared my feelings. We were building something new. One night during our walk, he stopped and said, "I don't want us to be like before. I want us to be better. I want to love you the way you need." For the first time in a long while, I believed him. Some days were still hard, but I also had moments of warmth and hope. We drove back to a town we had visited once. Walking those same streets holding hands, I could feel his hand clearly this time. We sat on a bench by the lake and he said, "I know I failed to see you before, but I see you now and I love you." I smiled and said, "I believe you, and I'm still here." On our anniversary, he gave me a card that said, "Thank you for staying." I wrote back, "Thank you for seeing me." That night, we sat in the dark and I rested my head on his shoulder. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was full of something strong and quiet. He asked if I thought we would make it, and I said, "I think we already are." A month later, I finished a painting I had started during our hardest days, two hands almost touching. I added new color and changed them so they touched softly. I showed it to James and asked what he saw. He looked at it for a long time and said, "Us." And I knew that even though we still had work to do, we were finally doing it together.